Magdalene's blog 56. Rachel had stayed the night outside my room in heartfelt prayer, and had set Abrineth to guard the door to the alley, lest any of our noises drew unwelcome attention. Thankfully, the ensuing outbursts weren't so loud as the first. Eventually, she had fallen asleep as well, and now awoke stiff-limbed and sore. For a few moments she couldn't remember where she was, but as her memories of the last night returned, she got up hurriedly. There were sounds of movement from within the room. Hesitantly, Rachel's hand stretched out to open the door, and she started in shock as it opened in front of her. I was stood there, and to Rachel's immense relief, my eyes didn't have the mad glare she had seen there before. "Have you some water?" I asked. "I'm so thirsty." I wanted her to hug me, but was frightened of the turbulence that still stalked inside my mind. She smiled broadly, though, and scurried off to get us both a drink. As we sat together, I described my feelings of urgency to go back to Marimion, before unpredictable streams of thought could return to confuse and confound me again. Rachel explained there would be no healing done that day, as it was the Sabbath, and Yeshua was spending the day teaching some of his close disciples. This much she'd been able to gather from the woman she had talked to last evening. I still wanted to return. I didn't care if there was nobody else around. All the better in some ways. I dearly wished to see that it was real. Yes, to try and recapture the moment when he had been speaking there. Reluctantly, Rachel agreed to accompany me, but when we reached Marimion, neither of us wanted to go too close to the house. We loitered beneath the trees, enjoying something of the shade they gave, and watching the house for signs of life. I could feel Rachel wasn't altogether enjoying it, and was on the point of saying that we should go, when a flurry of activity came down the road. One man was leading a few others at a fast pace. He was talking to the two directly by his side, and they were laughing. The sun was warm, but the day hadn't yet reached its full heat. Before the group turned into Yeshua's house, I already knew that they were going there. I recognized the master from my vision in the desert, when I had been driven from the last village and had thought my death was upon me. The same kindness shone in the face, the same tawny hair and beard, the same feeling of calm sureness is what I saw. Then he was round the corner and had gone into his house. Just for a moment his eyes had taken in the two of us, stood underneath the trees. Dark eyes across the intervening shadows in the bright lit road. When he had gone, we looked at each other and both had the same thought, I know. He saw us standing here. He saw us and we saw him. One of the men came out and started sweeping out the front yard where all the people had been. Then apparently he thought better of it and put the broom away. It was the Sabbath after all. He got out a wooden chair and placed it in the shade and sat there instead. I think he must have seen us standing where we were, but it didn't bother him. Instead, he himself defined a kind of boundary for us. Yeshua would be teaching in a room behind, somewhere in the house. Two men and a woman came up towards the house, to the doorway where the man we had thought of as the guard was sat. They talked for a few moments, and then the visitors turned and left. We were just thinking of doing the same, of going back to where we were staying, thankful for what we had seen already, when two women came out of the side door of the house and came across towards us. Both had shawls over their heads as we did. One was slightly older than the other, and it was her that came forward and addressed us both. "Hello, my name is Mary, and my son has asked me to make sure you are all right. He is the teacher Yeshua who lives in this house." Something about this woman's presence was most engaging. She was relaxed and made me feel at ease as well. "My name is Mary too, Mary Magdalene," I said, "and we have come looking for Yeshua's help. Well, actually, Rachel has brought me here because of my problem." I had never talked like this since the time I had been abominated, and Rachel looked at me in shocked surprise. There are these presences in me that I cannot break free from. They control much of my thinking, and anything I feel they latch onto and feed on it if they can, leaving me helpless to stop what they do. This was the first time I had spoken of what was happening to me, and I could at the same time feel stirrings of protest from the spirits themselves. It seemed that Yeshua's mother was herself a kind of shield against their malicious power, but which I knew still lay coiled, deadly and ever watchful within me. She turned to talk with Rachel next, asking her where she had travelled from and where she stayed. They seemed to me to have a natural understanding, and Mary asked us both whether we should like to come inside and take some refreshment. The other woman introduced herself as Salome, and it was with a little trepidation that I followed them towards the side door of the house. The balance of control within my mind was finely held, and it felt like I was taking a cage of wild and dangerous animals in there with me. The inside of the house was like others I had seen, but there was something a bit different. It wasn't plush, but there was an almost shining cleanness. There were other women busy inside. A working harmony prevailed. Certainly no place for unruly spirits to be let loose. I knew my job was to be carrying them, containing them, and this I concentrated on doing. Yeshua's mother Mary smiled at me and gave me a glass of hot sweet mint tea, which was my favourite. I could smile in reply and enjoy the drink. Her face emanated serenity and was quite like her son's, except with grey eyes and streaks of grey in her dark hair. There was a knock at the side door, and one of the women let a traveller in. He looked as though he had come a long way, and took off his cloak and exchanged his boots for soft sandals. Mary greeted him as a dear friend, embracing him. "Lamas, welcome," she said. "The master has been hoping you could get here. He is teaching in the inner room. Will you have a drink with us, or will you go straight in?" "Dear Lady Mother," the man replied, who reminded me a bit of Sarita's Caspar. He must have travelled from the east, I thought. How could I not accept your offer? But how can I delay going in either? Mary pressed a glass of tea into his hand, and he took his time savouring it. "Thank you. That was like a whole day's rest," he said and laughed. "I shall not delay any longer then." He looked around the room and smiled at Rachel and me. Then he had gone further into the house, and Mary went with him. I looked around and saw that we were in an anteroom that seemed to be also used for meals. Off this room, towards the back of the house, was the kitchen, where most of the women were working. I was just beginning to wonder what we should be doing, when Salome came over and sat with us, offering us some biscuits that had been freshly baked. I took one and nibbled at it, ever fearful that each new activity would tip my balance. It was made of almonds, and probably tasted delicious, but I couldn't spare the attention to notice. Then someone else knocked on the side door, and Salome opened it to see that a woman had brought some fruits as an offering. I glimpsed the man who had been out the front stood just behind the woman. Salome nodded to him that it was all right. He went away, and Salome let her in. She came and sat at the table I was at. By now Mother Mary had come back into the room, and the newcomer quickly rose and gave her offerings to her, and she gracefully accepted them. Mary gave them in turn to Salome, who had just returned with the drink for the woman. Yeshua's mother was clearly in charge of the household, and made a few quick arrangements. She suggested to Salome that the newcomer might like to help prepare a dish with the fruit she had brought, and then, turning to Rachel, asked, "Please could you both stay for a while as well? The master wishes that I spend some time with Mary." "I would love to," said Rachel. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "I think that you could stay with us, Mary and I, if you would. Let's go into the front room. I'd like to show it to you. We call it the long room. Yeshua has been working on it to make it suitable for his work." The long room had been made from what had previously been two front rooms, either side of a central corridor, that had led from the front door into the centre of the house. The corridor walls had been replaced by sturdy wooden arches that completely opened up the space. There was a graceful armchair set with a cushion at the far end, facing back down the length of the room, and also slightly to the windows at the front, where the windows had been widened in a similar way to the arches, so that the space outside the front of the house could almost be made to become a part of the room.